we're breaking down these walls that have existed and these layers of management. Back to what I was saying about these CTOs and SVPs and these high-level executives that come to us all excited. We hear all the time from executives. They're like, I haven't coded in 5 years or 8
I'm
years.
back.
I'm back. Exactly. It's like this reawakening, and I think it's so cool.
Hey, Luca here. Welcome to a new episode of the Refactoring Podcast, where every 2 weeks we interview a world-class tech leader. Today's guest is Matt McClernan, CEO of Augment Code, which is one of the leading AI coding platforms built specifically for large and complex code bases. With Matt, we went through the findings of our own research that we developed together with Augment, surveying more than 400 engineering teams about how they're using AI. And we went through many topics, from the differences between personal and team adoption, challenges, how documentation looks like a secret weapon, how to manage context in AI coding, and much more. And then we talked about the future, how the UX of AI coding is changing with IDEs, CLI tools, and agents, and what the future might bring. So let's dive right into the action. Welcome, Matt, and thank you for being on the show today.
Thanks, Luca. It's great to finally sit down together.
Yeah, Matt, so you are the CEO of Augment Code, which is an AI coding platform which is built specifically for professional software engineers and especially large, complex code bases. And the reason I'm super excited to have you on the show today is that we recently wrapped our biggest research project ever at Refactoring. We surveyed more than 400 teams about how they're using AI. And we did this together, right? You funded and supported part of the research. And the findings are very fascinating and sometimes surprising. So I wanted to dig into what we learned and get your take as well. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, sounds like a great one.
So the first thing we found, which probably is not totally surprising, is that personal adoption of AI for individual engineers is super strong. Like, 90% of them uses AI every week, but team adoption is kind of chaotic. I mean, most teams have like zero shared guidance, no shared practices. Engineers are just expected to figure everything out on the job. So first of all, is it something you see as well with your customers, with the companies you work with? And if so, why do you think there is such a gap?
Sure. Yeah. So first you got to zoom out and understand that we're really early in the AI for code industry in general, right? So I still think there's a lot of enterprises that have yet to even step foot into the arena and bring these types of products into their organization. The other thing to keep in mind is that bringing AI for code into an existing code base brings its own set of challenges, right? And so I'd say at an individual level, the adoption varies pretty dramatically. When you start using these types of tools, of course, it depends on developers' own curiosity and sort of willingness to take risk with one of these products, right? So you start with the early adopters, and as time goes on, you see gradually other team members see what sort of productivity those developers are gaining, and as they learn more and more about examples of where they're using agents to produce cool things or accomplish things far faster than they could have done otherwise manually, that's when you see other team members sort of gradually step in and start using these products as well. So when you look at a broader organization, the individual adoption varies pretty wildly. And then when you look at it from a team perspective, given that developers are all using different editors and they have different ways of going about doing their work, it's hard to standardize, at a team level. And so I'd say, we've yet to see consistency, generally speaking, about the standards that should be used by these developing teams.
Hey, Luca here. Big news for anyone working in app security. The new OWASP Top 10 is here, and it's already reshaping how organizations think about application security. From AI-driven vulnerabilities to software supply chain risks, the latest update shows just how fast the threat landscape is evolving. So to help you stay ahead, join a live session with Vandana Verma-Segal, OWASP leader and staff developer advocate at SNCC on Thursday, December 11 at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Plus, you will earn 1 CP credit for attending this workshop live. You will learn how to identify the biggest changes in the 2025 OWASP Top 10, understand how evolving threats are reshaping AppSec priorities, and apply practical steps to strengthen your organization's security posture. Register now and join us live. So do you think this is the right way of rolling this out? That is, bottom up, we make engineers experiment, pick the tools they prefer, and then you maybe find your champions in the team that can spearhead practices before you get any shared usage or shared workflow. Is that the stage that most companies are in right now?
Yeah, that's pretty common. It's difficult to force developers to use any particular product. That's been true historically with dev tools, right?
Forever.
So that's right. That's right. So that's the common pattern that we see, and companies go through these stages of progression. Where the first stage is what you just described. They just make these products available, and you as a engineering leader, you want to observe and understand what the adoption looks like across the teams. What are the patterns? And you can't really form an opinion until you have some number of months of exposure to how your teams are using these products, until you figure out, okay, where are the gaps in adoption? What other products might we need to bring in and make available to our teams to try and address those gaps of adoption? And so it's incremental. And then the other aspect that you mentioned around having champions, that's key as well. Once you identify in this kind of bottoms up experimental phase, some individuals that are both influential in the team and are also, very much AI forward thinking and are doing innovative things with AI, you want to sort of raise up those individuals and give them a platform for your engineering teams, your broader teams. And so I see what makes a lot of enterprises successful in accelerating adoption is they take this champion circle for AI and they
Yeah.
create some sort of operating rhythm as an engineering organization where they meet every couple of weeks or on a monthly basis and
Yeah.
they feature the different use cases. And that has this effect of sort of continuing to ignite interest and build more trust across the broader team. And so you have to reach this level of saturation, basically, of total adoption before
Yeah.
you can aspire to do more things and more measurable things with AI.
Yeah, so basically, first of all, create the feedback loop. People talk to each other and share what is working before you standardize anything at the team level.
That's right. That's right. One of the
Yeah.
things that we talk about with success for our customers is traditionally when you're working with an enterprise software vendor like us, I'm speaking on behalf of a customer. You expect when you buy a product that customer success is the organization like an Augment would be there constantly responding to the individual's questions and requests and things they're trying to figure out. But what we find as we work with CTOs is they're all aspiring to have a sustainable AI for code program inside their engineering organizations. So success looks like an environment where their internal teams are helping each other with success. It's not to say that we're not there guiding them along the way, but you know when you're in a place where this is sustainable, when you've got your own individual team members through whatever messaging system you have internally, Slack, whatever it may be, people are chiming in and helping each other. And then that's a
Yeah.
really good signal that this is something that's going to be sustained.
Yeah, I love the idea of creating this kind of vibes, right, and mutual support. And I think it's important also because there are many people who are legitimately like scared and anxious about the role that AI is going to play in their work and how their skills and work is going to change. So I think creating this support net and support network is very important for many people, I guess.
For sure.
Yeah. So, and I think it was spot on what you said, because when we look at the challenges that we found, people, both individuals and teams having adopting AI in their workflows in the survey, number one was there's just no best practices around that we can adopt, or too much volatility. And so I think many believe it's not even worth to try, to go all in something, because it's gonna like probably change in a couple of weeks or so. So do you think, if you think at the top teams that work with you that make the best out of AI, do you think we are still in this kind of super volatile phase where we just have to be reactive to what the models can do today or tomorrow? Or is there already something that good teams are standardizing and are getting especially right?
Yeah, I think for the teams that are most advanced using our product, I think for one, they tend to standardize on one or just a couple of AI for code products across the organization. It depends on the size.
Mm.
When you have tens of thousands of engineers, Augment, for example, works especially well on complex backend code bases.
Yeah.
And so, we typically see that's where we're going to win consistently in organizations. But there may be other products that companies want to standardize on for front end work or for 0 to 1 production. And what I see is companies get to a place where they sort of stabilize and they have a finite number of these products for specific use cases across a portfolio. And then they actually establish, kind of classic enterprise governance, where now they can start making sense of across the different products in their portfolio, the adoption for each of those. They can start getting more aspirational about how they measure productivity, or in our case,
Mm.
code that's actually released into production. And so they can really
Mm.
start pushing forward and having more evidence of real impact. But it does take some amount of, like I said earlier, kind of the concept of saturation of your team broadly adopting some form of these products and using them
Yeah.
consistently. And then you iterate on that over time. So it's a journey, and it's hard to get
Yeah.
there when you've got a large scale company and team of engineers.
Yeah. You mentioned evidence. So, what's your advice for getting this kind of evidence that these tools are making a difference? Do you think that we are still early in an early stage where adoption is already enough to measure, to say we are on the right track, or we should measure like impact in other ways of what these tools are doing?
I think everyone is trying to figure that out actively right now.
Yeah.
What are the golden metrics of adoption? What does good adoption actually look like? And it's the same thing with the concept of developer productivity, right? There are just
Yeah.
so many varying perspectives on it. There's some great products that are out there in the market today that that you can pump your data from products like Augment into their dashboarding, and they've got ways to show in a very clean format the type of durability of the code you're producing, and the engagement
Mm.
on an individual level. And so I think that industry is emerging rapidly for a good reason. And I'm also seeing a lot of large enterprises take this dashboarding in house and build it out themselves and apply their own way
Yeah.
of thinking. So I think we're going to see some great innovation in the next couple of years and some major breakthroughs in really starting to understand what is developer productivity in a really granular way with these products. And then I think we'll
Yeah.
see some form of standardization. I think will occur, in the next couple of years because of that.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And I love that you mentioned more like long-term qualities, like the fact that the churn, is not too high, long-term value of the code. I totally agree versus just measuring, I don't know, what's the percentage of code that gets written by AI versus humans. Like it doesn't get the big picture, right?
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. So another, I think, very interesting element that surfaced from the report is the role of documentation. That is, it turned out that people who are the happiest with AI correlate very strongly with people who make the heaviest and use of documentation. Like it's kind of a virtuous cycle where writing better docs creates better context for AI, which allows AI even to perform better and provide better answers, better code. So on one hand, you see this kind of cycle, but it's not the only possible view, because some say we don't need a lot of docs anymore because AI can understand code anyway. So what do you think about it? What are you seeing from your vantage point?
Yeah, I'll say, so we went GA with our product in November of last year, in November of 2024. In our initial conversations with enterprises, we were talking about use cases, and
Yeah,
documentation was the top 1 or 2 use case. It's just a
yeah,
painful topic, and it's, the reality with documentation is it's always out of date. And because of
yeah,
that, it's not trusted, and there's not a lot of urgency in updating documentation, and that has this downstream effect, of course, as you're calling out around this virtuous cycle. It's the reverse of that, which makes it harder and harder as your
yes,
team grows, as your code base ages. Onboarding new developers can take longer and longer, right? And like an example of one of our customers who is using Augment on a 20-year-old plus monolith, it was taking them a year and a half to onboard new developers onto this code base. It was only a 30,000 file code
wow,
base, but it puts them in a very dangerous position. This is a SaaS company that has nearly 100 million external users touching this platform, and they saw this as an existential risk. And when it comes to the documentation piece of it, it seems so simple, but that's one of the core problems that they had to address, right? Is how do we get to a place where we have live representation and documentation of this underlying system so that we can bring on new developers faster and faster. So with Augment, they're able to bring developers on board in a couple of weeks because our product
Yeah.
already has the context on behalf of the developers. So when you take that concept of context back to documentation, as you mentioned, the documentation is like the basic fuel of
Yeah.
context. And the agents that developers are using in AI are only as good as the underlying context that they have. So for sure, it's like when you think about the building blocks of having this sustainable practice of AI for code in your organization, by
Yeah.
addressing the core, the context of it, you put yourself in
Yeah.
a great position and sure you're going to get much better outputs from models that you can trust. And so I think it's we're seeing it for sure.
Yeah. And do you think that what is it more likely in the future that we don't need a lot of docs anymore because AI can explain what the code does maybe on the fly, right? We ask it and it's done, or maybe AI writes help us write more docs that are more easily to be maintained, and so it removes a lot of the burden from our shoulders, or maybe something in between. What do you think?
I feel we're already seeing that we're relying on agents to write the documentation and keep it up to date. And so
Yeah,
that's something that when you think about how AI for code is being used, and as we saw in the report, there's this sort of baseline that's addressed with AI for code, and the more the mundane tasks that people
yeah,
don't really want to spend their time doing, highly paid professionals who are experts in their craft, addressing documentation. So you allow the agents to do that, and you can trust the quality of the output in the documentation, and you can even get into a system where you've got agents that are checking other agents' work and making sure that it's fully accurate representation of the current state of the systems. So I think as that's addressed over time with agents, just the quality of the work and the output is going to continue to accelerate, which is really
yeah.
exciting.
Yeah, I love it. I love that it looks like AI will help us in good engineering practices, as opposed to, I don't know, fueling our worst instincts. So it feels like we are going on the right path. So I like that.
Yeah.
And we mentioned context, right, which is a very big topic today. How do you manage context? How do you make tools fetch the right context to do what they do? It's also linked that one of the biggest narratives around AI coding tools, that is when you have large code bases, they either stop being useful or they're less useful because they can't understand things. And of course, Augment is all about this, right? It's large code bases, enterprises, and so I know you have invested a lot in getting the right context, understanding it right. And this is also a topic where there is not big consensus. I mean, from my perspective, we have very different types of coding tools, from those who try to fetch context, do RAG, to like CLI tools that sometimes don't do even RAG, and in any way, they just grab code. So what's your take on, William, how do we make AI understand code bases and large code bases? What do you do at Augment, and what do you think should be done?
Yeah, you're right. This is this is our secret sauce for
Yeah.
sure. Right?
Spill the
Um,
beans.
yeah, well, to some extent, I'll give you some, right?
Yeah.
And give you some
As much as
perspective.
you can. Yeah.
Yeah, and how we think about it, right? So, so we set out in the summer of 22 to provide a platform that professional software developers could trust as an AI coding assistant at the time, right? It's evolved dramatically, the space has since then, but they could trust to use in their code bases with teammates. And we knew to be able to do that effectively, it was pretty clear early on with LLMs that the outputs you get are only as good as the inputs you give the models, right? So we set
Yeah.
out to address the context piece of it on behalf of developers. And so we spent over 2 years in stealth building out a large research team and a systems engineering team. And we combined this concept of our own retrieval system that we built. So we are RAG based. And we do believe that that's necessary to address the semantic gap that you have with
Mm.
models and being able to understand, an existing complex code base. But we have our own retrieval system. And then we also have this hyperscale semantic indexing capability. So what that enables us to do is when a developer uses Augment as a plugin into VS Code or JetBrains or their CLI, however they might interact with our product, Augment rapidly indexes the entire code base and continuously does that with every keystroke by every developer across the code base inside an organization. So that ensures that the context engine, that's what we refer to this
Yeah.
as the developers working with our product in real time has access to the most important bits of information that are relevant to the work or the prompts that engineer is inputting with our product, so that the outputs they're getting are very trustworthy and very reliable, right? And so we think, like, based off of just the benchmarks that we've run, it's objectively a better method is using
Mm.
RAG to assist the models and the outputs that you're getting. And what we
Yeah.
think is over time, and what we've seen is that as the model quality continues to improve, combined with RAG, the outputs continue to improve. So it's like the delta still, the gap still
Mm.
remains, is what we found with each major release of some of the large frontier, well-known frontier models. But that search and retrieval aspect on behalf of the engineers is always going to be important,
Yeah.
and that's why we have specific examples of customers where we are able to be. We're the only product in AI for coding that can serve. In one large organization, they have 1 million file code base, and their developers
Yeah.
have access to many different AI for code products that are well known out there today. But they didn't have something that could serve those developers because the products just don't work. They're
Yeah.
unreliable. Augment can, because of that real time indexing and understanding and retrieval system that we provide on behalf of the developers. But we also have examples with developers that are working on 10,000 file Kotlin code bases, and it's the complexity of that code base that these products, as you mentioned, when they're just doing simple grep
Yeah.
and sort of agent brute searching across the code base, it takes too long. You're just kind of grasping at strings and hoping to find the right bits of information, and ultimately developers are going to abandon those products because it's not going to be useful or trustworthy.
Yeah. And I'm curious, what made you realize that the context engine and the RAG system had to be kind of your secret sauce, the thing where you could build your competitive advantage, as opposed to we can pick this off the shelf, right? Because I think for an engineer who is like kind of outside of this industry, might think RAG could be like commodity, right? While I think on the inside, it's very different. Is it that it doesn't work well with code, like out of the box, the standard algorithms that we all know? What makes it so hard?
Yeah, I'll say it was a really hard research challenge for us. We actually,
Hmm.
over the course of the first year and a half as a company with our research team, it took us 3 different approaches to finally crack this challenge so our retrieval system is a series of RAG, working all together. And we know from what we hear in the market that many of our competitors also started out with this approach, but they gave up, they abandoned it because their conclusion was it wasn't possible. So it's a hard
Hmm.
problem to solve. Um, we knew that this would be necessary. A lot of our founding team has come from enterprise engineering backgrounds, so very experienced, have architected distributed systems for ultimately publicly traded companies. So they understood what would be necessary for engineers that are in a future state working in really complex systems. And we
Hmm.
had the good fortune of having time. Like I said, we were in stealth to experiment and research and figure this out, and then also build out the infrastructure. And I think part of the challenge with a lot of the other competition that's out there today or will emerge in the future is they don't have the luxury of time. With how fast this
Yeah.
market's moving, I think you definitely have to make some really important binary bets in our world. Do you want to
Yeah.
train your own models, or do you want to rely on the model providers themselves and trust that competition in the intelligence layer will benefit you at the top of the stack? The same was true
Yeah.
with RAG for us, right? And where much of our competition didn't focus on RAG. We focused on meeting developers where they are as a plugin initially, and we also believe
Yes.
longer term, the majority of the impact with AI for developers will actually occur outside of the client interface, outside of the IDE. And so that's kind of what we've been positioning ourselves for. But there's some very successful companies in our industry. They made the bet to take an IDE and fork that and just
Yeah.
kind of use that as a wrapper over other models developers could choose from. So, there's a number of different ways to go about it. We find
Yeah.
practically working with enterprises that they're just developers are underserved where they're working on code bases of much complexity, because the majority of these
Yeah.
products were built for 0 to 1 code production, and the majority of developers outside of enterprises.
Yeah, yeah, and I will. You touch on so many important topics, and I will ask you more later about that, like all the different approaches to AI coding tools, which I find very fascinating. But uh, want to stay on context for a while, because I think there are like two sides of this coin. I mean, one is the type of context that AI is able to interpret and fetch by itself, interpreting the code base and what has at its own disposal, and then there is what we as humans can do to help AI to provide the right context to AI in the form of, we mentioned documentation, but anything really that can help. Uh, have you found that there are good practices, good ways we can actually make the AI do a better work by providing them context inside the repo or in this or that way? Do you have an opinion about things that work better, work less good, and so on?
Well, keep in mind, we're taking a different approach here at Augment, right? Where we're doing this on behalf of developers, and our intent is to take that cognitive load off their plate, right? So,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we're many of the bets that we're making internally is how do we continue to expand the scope of context that we can capture on behalf of
Mm,
developers. So again, it's not the upfront work is not required, and part of that, of
yeah,
course, is having the integrations and MCP servers and things to bring in any bits of information that would be necessary for context for developers. But the other piece is with our context engine and our retrieval system is expanding that bucket of context. And as we see organizations move beyond just the interactive use of our product, they start to aspire to other use cases, across the software development lifecycle. So there's things, for example, like incident response management. And so
mm,
when it comes to context, we now expand the type of context we gather to logs and traces and
yeah,
metrics to better facilitate those sorts of use cases. So whether you accomplish that manually and you have these buckets of information that you could point, your AI to, or, as you're working with these products, or, with Augment, we're providing this on behalf of developers as enterprises kind of guide us on the paths that they want to go and what type of context they want.
yeah. So basically, the advice is for every piece of your tech stack, and then your observability tools and tools that you use for doing for your developer process, find a way to plug them to make them available to AI to give additional context and to make them do a better job, basically.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's like having a context first mindset. It goes back to the documentation, like we talked
Yeah,
about, and some of that can feel it's not as energizing, right? Starting from context is to doing the interactive day to day work, right? But stepping back and thinking through context, and that includes documentation, the things you mentioned, it's ultimately going to serve all of these use cases better, because AI, end of the day, is going to require that information to produce reliable outcomes.
yeah, yeah. Totally agree. So, looking at other outcomes from the survey, we asked people what are their top concerns about
Mm.
using AI more for coding, and by far the number one concern is code quality. And this has to be like exploded a bit, because I think the concern is not just that AI is possibly creating worse code, like in absolute, but rather also the fact that we have less control over that code, we know it less well, right? And so over the long run, it's harder to maintain. Testing it is perceived as hard, debugging takes more time, and so on. Do you have do you have ideas and best and good practices about how people should think about quality control and ensuring code quality in AI generated code? What do you see good teams are doing?
Yeah. Well, so a basic starting point, I'd say, is not to abandon the pursuit of high quality code output from your AI coding product. I think one of
Mm,
the mistakes that organizations make, that I see, and we see it playing out in the landscape of companies that are emerging across the software development lifecycle, is companies sort of move beyond the belief that they can have consistent high quality code produced with
mm,
AI facilitating, and so they instead jump toward code review and test failure automation and QA and all these other areas, with this sort of assumption that these products that they're using today are just going to kind of produce code that's not trustworthy, and so
Yeah.
we need to kind of address the downstream bottlenecks.
That's the best they can do. Yeah.
Right. And so I would say, I think it's important to kind of stay in that first stage of addressing code creation and getting to a place where you have a high degree of confidence about the quality of code output you're getting on with your developers, with the AI coding assistant they're using, before jumping to the next phase and looking at code review and other aspects as we go along. Now, the other piece you asked about is like, what are companies doing that are that's successful? And I would say that it's kind of I'd say it's similar pattern to what we saw with cloud migrations. So this type of
Mm.
transformation we're going through, I think, is comparative to what happened in the big cloud migration era. And with companies, as they made the move from on-prem into the cloud, they would have these programmatic ways of going in stages of moving their applications into the cloud. And they would start with like the low-hanging fruit, the least impact type applications, move those first, see how they worked in these cloud data centers, and then move on, and kind of over time graduate to things that are more and more impactful. And what I see with enterprises who are experienced and remember those patterns that they just went through in the last, whatever it would have been, 5, 10, 15 years, they take a similar approach to the developers and coding
Mm.
and with these products, which is sort of constrain where it's being used
Mm.
initially, and think specifically about use cases to start around migrations and refactors, and not touching core business logic on day one. So start with like that blast radius is smaller, controllable,
Yeah.
but you can get outcomes that you can measure and test still. You get anecdotes as well. And then you mentioned around testing, and that's onerous, but like you still have to insist on tests as part of that output, right?
Yeah.
And so I'd say the other piece is keeping changes smaller so you can have a higher
Yeah.
frequency of review, rather than in core business logic allowing
Yeah.
an agent to kind of run unchecked for hours. It seems kind of logical, right? But it's like ensuring there's still a
Yeah.
bit of a human in the loop, especially as you're working on more mission critical projects.
Yeah. I love that a lot of this advice just looks like good engineering advice that we are usually giving also to humans, right? Keep batch sizes small and commit often, do small PRs. But do you think there is now this kind of low hanging fruit just to make bigger changes because we unleash agents, we let them run wild, and then we get to this like thousands of lines of code PRs that are super hard to review? And I mean, that's maybe where the issues about quality come from rather than AI itself. It's more about the workflow.
For sure. And that's, where we are focused as a business going forward from here are workflows. And it's really interesting to work with different enterprises. Um, it's a journey with AI for code. So it starts with the interactive use of these products. But as companies get to a place, as their executives feel comfortable that there's some sustainable use of AI for code, and they can generally sort of trust how it's being used interactively, the common pattern is, okay, we want to now rethink the software development lifecycle. We want to look at our common workflows. And in a similar pattern, let's start with sort of like the most approachable workflows first and figure out how we can use agents to automate those. And how do we use
Yeah.
scripts and incorporate agents and just kind of chip away like one use case at a time. So we're starting to see patterns emerge there. It's early, but I think that's inevitable based off of every
Yeah.
conversation we're having with execs.
Yeah. And I love also what you said before, that is, if you're trying AI coding tools and you get a bad output, don't just settle with that and give up and say, okay, I have to fix it on my own, like as a human, but figure out why that's the case, right? And focus on the inputs in a way rather than the outputs. Because I mean, what I'm hearing is that if AI is producing bad code, that signal, that there is something you can do better upstream. Am I right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you think about it, it's like with tech debt. It's like with any, working toward any successful outcome over time. I love the way you phrase that. It's exactly,
Yeah.
it's you control for the inputs and you test the
Yeah.
outputs until as you tweak those inputs, you get the outputs that you trust and you want, and then you sort of graduate to the next phase. But we're in such an experimental era with AI for good reason, and we're part of it, and we're fortunate for that. That there tends to be there's just such an urgency to move and adopt these products in different parts of the development lifecycle, and there's real risk that maybe in the next year or so, I think there's going to be a bit of a reckoning inside large enterprises that got out of the gates
Mm,
really fast and started adopting many different products and bringing into different workflows and sort of not being thoughtful about standards
mm,
and the inputs and just the practices, standard engineering leadership practices we've learned from over the years. And I think there's going to be this sort of like recoil and reset in those
mm.
organizations where there's going to be more governance put in place, like I mentioned
Yeah,
earlier, and a need to address the debt that's been created, and it's a
yeah,
more complicated form of debt in a sense as well with these AI for code products, right? So I think it'll be interesting to see the companies that have yet to adopt these products. I think we don't know because we're generally working with companies that have already used AI for code. We want to focus on companies that already have some experience. It's the only way they can really appreciate the significance of our context engine. It's not even
yeah,
relevant until you know what to expect from your developers using these products. But that means that we are not interacting with companies that are kind of on the outside looking in. And I think that wave of companies, I would expect they're going to be working with large consulting companies and putting frameworks and best practices systems in place to start. Very different than the start of our conversation here where companies are saying we don't have that stuff yet. Well, that's all being
yeah,
built real time. And then that next wave of companies I think will be really interesting to see. They'll be a lot more pragmatic about this approach, but I think they'll probably be able to achieve results from the beginning to finish a lot faster because they're not going to deal with all the mess and cleanup and the learning
yeah.
zone.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it feels to me like at the beginning we talked about adopting things bottom up, empowering individuals to try their own things, and that's like a divergent phase, right? And which feels kind of easier than converging at some point, right? I mean, trying to build shared understanding and reducing the surface of how we do things and what we use. That's probably what many companies are going to wake up to and make a strong effort to reconcile a lot of different things that people are doing with AI.
Yeah, you're right, and it's a really fun era to observe and live in it every day
Yeah,
because companies realize how existential this moment is for their businesses. AI
yeah,
presents this opportunity to differentiate, to go pursue new opportunities, to refactor systems and like reinvent yourself as a business. And so the instinct at an executive level is to remove friction, from teams adopting these products and just make it available and just go. And so there's this like freedom that I haven't observed. I've been in working with large enterprises and technology for 20 years. And initially that was largely working with IT leaders, and then over the last 7, 8 years, more on the engineering side of the house. But there's always been governance that's sort of mitigated, risk
yeah,
and adoption of technologies, and there's just been a bureaucratic process that even when there's really obvious technologies and moments that like that this software, this hardware could like transform a company's future state, it takes longer to get these things implemented and tested, and there's a lot of impact that's assessed. With AI, there's this, like back to I said, this freedom and sort of an abandonment because there's this realization that like the gates are wide open, everyone is doing it right now, and if you don't
yeah,
participate in this moment you will be left
yeah,
behind, right? So it'll be interesting to see, like even with CISOs. Like we had this one of our enterprise customers who's one of our better adopters, I'd say, more forward thinking adopters in a publicly traded company. Their CISO, as they were adopting agents, sort of acknowledge like, hey, the way the speed at which this is going is sort of like one of my biggest fears. I knew this day was coming,
mm,
and I can't ultimately stand in the way of it because I see the importance for our business. But there's this different risk tolerance that now is required, and I
mm,
feel for security leaders because they're walking a really fine line of protecting their company's best interests and their customers' best interests as well, but also ensuring that they're allowing their teams to get access to AI and technologies that are going to help them be successful long term. So it's
yeah.
It's like back to the governance and the convergence thing you described. It'll be really interesting to see at the post divergence and then
Yeah.
convergence. What do these roles look like in a few years? And how do we
Yeah.
function?
It's incredibly messy. I mean, I think that even, I mean, the technology moves way faster than how fast people can adapt and organizations can adapt. I think, there is also always this ceiling that is how fast people can change how they work, and which is always slower than tech. And I think that even if, for any reason, the progress of frontier models stopped today, right? And we didn't get any new like Claude Sonnet or GPT-6. We don't get them for like 10 years. For 10 years, we'll probably still be discovering ways of working with this, and companies will be still on the on the ramp up phase of getting more and more out of this, because to me it feels like we're scratching the surface, but because companies and people and groups of people physically can change faster than at some rate, right?
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, it goes to the concept of this. Some might think this is a bubble, right? And
Yeah,
it's just I see daily the amount of real impact AI is having for companies, and
yeah,
the productivity gains. And we see customers that mandate that they want to see 100% productivity gains from their engineering teams with our product. And they want projects that typically their timelines might have been 3 months was their typical expectation. They want to see those projects compressed to 6 weeks going forward at a company level, and they're meeting these targets, and they're able to go after bets and features that otherwise would have been backlogged much faster, right? And to your point, we're still learning so much. So even if the model layer were to, like you said, if we hit a pause, there's so
yeah,
much exploration about agents working with other agents, and
yeah,
different types of models, and the thinking and reasoning models with like the fast execution models, and how do you balance these together. And we're looking at things like agent personas, and none of that necessarily is contingent on the model layer, GPT-6, and like you said, these other things
sure,
you mentioned.
yes,
That's all available today, and we're just
yeah,
learning as we go. And it's like with every advancement, we're learning. There's new capabilities with every new model that's released, and we benchmark and test these models. We see new things and different
yeah,
characteristics that between real business needs and engineering team requirements, and thinking through pairing that with what different models are capable of. It's like you just hardly have enough time to settle in and think through all of that. You just react and go and test and move forward. And I think there's this element to this era as well, where there's more embracing failure and failing forward
yeah,
quickly, because the innovation that's kind of coming behind you is going to pick you up and give you the opportunity to do it again, and probably do it
yeah,
better, because the models will address some of the steps that mistakes you might have
yeah.
made, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Embracing failure. It's just that I think that that's kind of the standard operating mode for startups or small companies, but it's way harder for enterprises and large companies to kind of all of a sudden develop the kind of agility and the comfort with this kind of risk. And but it's gonna be like funny times. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's it's really fun working with executives in the large enterprises who have this
Yeah.
sort of mindset. And those people, these executives, it's what's been really fun about this as well is they're like, when I say executives, I mean CTOs, SVPs of
Yeah.
engineering of large engineering organizations. And they come to us in some cases initially and like, hey, we tried your product on our own home projects we're doing. And these are people
Yeah.
that, have been industry veterans for 30 years, but they're still tinkering with AI, and
Yeah.
they see the potential, and they want to bring it into their organization, and they have suspicion that this might really help their teams on existing code bases. And it goes back to our earlier conversation of thinking through really strategically, like, okay, one aspect of it sure is making it available to your teams and letting them just go, but in a large enterprise, like you said, there are these layers of management across an organization, and inherently they're more conservative, these companies. The companies are themselves, but these executives, these change agents that are in these companies, in these
Yes.
old businesses in some cases. I've seen like CTOs of 100+ year old companies that come to us excited and wanting to, move mountains for their company. They know, they understand the bureaucracy and the structure that exists. And so we're thinking through with them the idea, like we said earlier, about, okay, how do we go and isolate which team is most innovative inside the organization? There's always some
Yes.
team that's empowered, even in older
Yeah.
companies, that is empowered to break things, and you
Yes.
have to have that, right? So it's okay, let's go to that
Yes.
team. And it comes down to the ethos of different teams.
Yes.
You find that team most ready for it, get it in their hands, prove it out, and you just
Yeah.
kind of incubate that as an executive, and then you figure out, how do
Yeah.
I take that to the next team and the next, and it's a really fun strategic game.
Yeah.
That we're meeting with some execs from a old large media conglomerate next week in New York, and they're flying their CTO and all their other engineering executives in town, and what we recently started working with them, and that's what this conversation is going to be about, is let's think strategically and think about the organization, and how do we, back to this simple topic of adoption, how do we go and
Yeah.
like rewire this company and this engineering culture so you can look and move, very differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're an executive, I mean, that these are the things that you should thrive on, right? I mean, this kind of strategic thinking, this opportunity for change, right? This should be the things that make you excited. So I can definitely see that. And speaking of experimentation, one of the things that surprised me the most, I think, throughout this year is how much you mentioned many things like agents, IDEs, and we mentioned CLI tools before. How much the UX of writing code has kind of changed or feels like up for grabs. There are many different like interpretations of how to work with AI for writing code, which was generally something I did not expect. I mean, we have used IDs for like 20 years. They haven't changed that much, right? And if you ask people like 1 year ago how to use AI for coding, they would all answer like we use plugins inside VS Code, right, or a forked AI powered IDE, something like that. But now there are still these ones. There are CLI tools which behave completely different, and now there are agents as well, which are still kind of a different thing in a way. So, do you think this is like a linear evolution in the sense that each thing replaces another, or are these useful in different use cases? What do you see about this landscape?
I think about it like, if a given enterprise's code base is a patient, and the developers are the surgeons, there are
Mm,
different instruments you need to address different challenges for the patient. Determine, depending on whatever the underlying challenge is or outcome you're looking for. And so I do think that there's an inevitable like sort of portfolio of tools that'll be necessary to help developers be most precise about
yeah,
addressing these different opportunities or focus areas. And I think that's one of the exciting things about AI for code is, we believe that it's going to really continue to elevate the engineering industry, and we don't think it's going to be about replacing jobs. It's about elevating the craft. And when you think about it
yeah,
in that analogy, what's happening is, if you go back in time and like, early days of medicine and healthcare, and how much progress we made from then to today, where we've got, like Da Vinci robots performing appendectomies on behalf of surgeons, who are guiding it with a computer, and like the health outcomes and how much better they are today versus where they were in the beginnings. I think there's going to be a
yes,
similar scenario here, where we just have so much more at our disposal. I think it'll come back to the significance of best practices and guidelines, like we talked about
yeah,
earlier on, which is how to equip an incoming engineer into an organization with the right, the proper tools, and sort of the guidance is how to use those most effectively. And it's going to be use case driven that determines which of these, formats are going to be most useful. It's like when you think about engaging with autonomous agents that are working in the background on, and
yeah,
maybe you need a web interface to check in on those, or a mobile interface to be able to be
yeah,
pinged and guide them where necessary. But where you're working on really core important aspects of the code base that are business critical, you need that scalpel that's very manual,
yeah,
but you can be assured of the where you're making those cuts, which is true for like
yeah.
the strongest, most experienced software engineers. It's not about like the amount of code produced. It's about like knowing exactly where to make that cut, to get the outcome you want.
Yeah, I love the analogy. I will totally steal it for for the newsletter. And you made me think actually about this analogy that I'm speaking with many people in tech, engineers, managers, and it's funny how they see this topic differently. I mean, when you speak with engineers, they mostly say, I want to keep a tight feedback loop, have full control over every single line of code and review things, etc. So they're very kind of careful. Then you speak with engineering managers, and many of them say, it's the best time of my life. I'm back to coding. I unleash agents while I'm in a meeting, and and I fire off PRs. I'm super happy. So it's completely different, but it's funny that everyone gets to get kind of their hands dirty and try things. Some will win, some will fail. I don't know, but it's still funny.
Yeah, it's fun. It really we're breaking down these walls that have existed and these layers of management. Back to what I was saying about these CTOs and SVPs and these high level executives that come to us all excited. It's we
Yeah,
hear all the time from executives. They're like, I haven't coded in 5 years or 8 years.
I'm back.
I'm back. Exactly. It's like this reawakening, and I think it's so cool. It's so powerful, and yeah, it's just it's really encouraging about the future of where all this goes, because now everyone's engaged, and that's really important, right? It's like it's it's not like this traditional top down like sort of like crow's nest type view you would get from executives that are genuinely like detached from the realities of a developer day-to-day work. They're actually doing the work alongside them, like you said, and
Yeah,
the leaders have a little more freedom, as you mentioned, to have these agents working on their behalf in meetings. And one of our founders like basically just lets agents do the coding for him at this point. So yeah, it's a really fun time.
yeah, absolutely. So I want to keep this final segment to talk a little bit about Augment. So you are the CEO of one of the leading AI coding tools. So what's top of mind for you right now? That is, what is your North Star, the thing that you want to get right and you want to improve the most right now?
Yeah, our aspiration is to totally redefine the software development lifecycle. It's about automating all parts of it with agents,
Mm,
with AI and agents. And so what we're focused on is continue to provide a great interactive product with our platform, but then providing tools to enable developers to build workflows and automations with our agents across all aspects of the development lifecycle. And as I mentioned, working toward a place where these agents have their own personas, and we can get to a place where these agents can communicate with each other,
yeah,
and sort of provide checks and balances. And you've got like an architect persona, and so we're working aggressively toward that because our customers are pushing us there, and it's really fun. I should say we've been pulled that direction since we launched because of the power of context, and context matters so much, even more so when you get into automation,
yeah,
right? So early on, even before we had our agent, we had large enterprises who were using our product just for completions or just for chat, asking for API access into our context engine because they wanted to figure out like what it could be capable of to facilitate, you know, different elements of the software development lifecycle. So we're figuring out how to go down that path with our customers. And traditional companies, we put this another way, we see other companies in the space that are going this route, focusing on heavy forward deployed engineering work to make
mm,
this happen for companies, which means engineers working hands on keys with their customers to help build these automations and
yeah,
have them functional and so they can be sustainable. We think with our context engine, the huge advantage that we bring for companies is that time to value. And so by investing more and more in the context engine, and then also investing in sort of a toolkit for developers to be able to build these automations themselves, we want to remove the friction, and the goal should be
yeah,
to empower developers where they see those opportunities to build these automations and over time have
mm,
access to a library of templates that have worked before that get them 80% of the way there, 90% of the way there. So we can sort of accomplish this through this balance of a product-led growth motion, which we have today. So we've got the
yes,
self-serve side, and then we've got the sales-led side. And we want developers where that makes sense to be able to go on this journey themselves. And then we want to be able to engage with them with our go-to-market organization as well to give them best practices and make sure what they're putting in place is done with best practice and scalable. But I just don't see the need to build this army of forward deployed engineers. It's lead with the product and let the product drive that sort of disruption to the SDLC and improvement overall.
Yeah, and I love the vision that you laid out at the beginning about these kind of agents that have different purposes, different personalities, can talk to each other and interact, and you basically, as a human, you orchestrate this. And going back to what we said before about even if the models paused, we would still make progress for like 10 years. Do you think this is like achievable with the current capabilities of models? It's a matter of, as you said, giving them good context, creating good tooling and good contracts of communication maybe between them, or we are still far off? What do you think?
I think we're there. Yeah, we're there, and it's a matter of the caliber of these personas now. We're there. It's like, and then how do we just keep advancing them to where we can up level that architect persona, to be really senior, strong architect that can guide the work and best practices of all the other agents to get the best possible outcomes. And same is true for the other roles as well.
Yeah, super exciting. So thank you so much, Matt, for coming on the show today. It was a great chat.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, Luca. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this chat valuable, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the show. You can find all past episodes and learn more about the show at refactoring.fm. See you in the next episode.